Imagine creating a product so simple that almost everyone on earth would use it at some point in their lives. Now imagine that same invention generating billions of dollars, transforming an ordinary salesman into one of the most influential entrepreneurs in business history, and creating a business model that companies still copy more than a century later. Today, Gillette is one of the most recognizable brands in the world. Its products are sold in hundreds of countries, trusted by millions of consumers, and have become almost synonymous with shaving itself. For many people, the word Gillette isn't just a brand, it's the product. But what most people don't realize is that this global empire wasn't built by someone with years of engineering experience or unlimited financial resources. It was built by a man who spent much of his early career as a traveling salesman, constantly moving from city to city, trying to convince strangers to buy products that weren't even his own. Even more surprising, the idea that changed his life didn't come while he was working inside a laboratory. It came from a simple moment of frustration. A frustration so ordinary that millions of people experience the exact same problem every single morning without thinking twice about it. Instead of accepting that inconvenience as normal, one man asked a question that would eventually change an entire industry. What if the blade itself could be disposable? At the time, that idea sounded almost impossible. For generations, men used straight razors made from thick steel. They were expensive, dangerous, required constant sharpening, and demanded a level of skill that many people simply didn't have. Replacing the blade after every few shaves seemed wasteful, unrealistic, and financially impossible. Almost everyone believed the idea would fail, but sometimes the ideas that sound the most unrealistic become the ones that reshape entire industries. Because King Cam Gillette wasn't trying to improve an existing product, he was trying to change the entire way people thought about shaving. And in the process, he unknowingly created one of the most profitable business models ever invented, a model that would later inspire countless companies across industries, ranging from printers and coffee machines to gaming consoles and software subscriptions. By the end of this video, I'll share the 3 biggest lessons entrepreneurs can learn from Gillette's incredible journey. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. But to understand how one simple idea transformed an ordinary salesman into the founder of one of the world's most valuable brands, we need to go back to the middle of the 19th century. King Cam Gillette was born in 1855 in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. His family wasn't wealthy, but they valued hard work and self-reliance. As a young man, Gillette developed an unusual curiosity about inventions and business. He loved observing how everyday products were made. More importantly, he constantly wondered why so many common objects seemed unnecessarily complicated. Life, however, had different plans. Instead of becoming an inventor immediately, Gillette spent years working as a traveling salesman. The job required long days, endless train rides, and constant rejection. Every sale depended on earning the trust of complete strangers. It wasn't glamorous, but without realizing it, those years taught him lessons that would later become invaluable. He learned how customers made decisions. He learned what people valued. And perhaps most importantly, he learned how difficult it was to convince someone to abandon familiar habits. At the time, he had no idea that this understanding of consumer behavior would become just as important as the invention itself. Because creating a great product was only half the challenge. The other half would be convincing the world that it needed something completely different. During the late 19th century, King Cam Gillette spent nearly every day traveling from town to town, selling hardware products for the Crown, Cork, and Seal Company. The work was demanding. He visited stores, demonstrated products, negotiated prices, and constantly searched for new customers. Like most salesmen of his time, success depended on persistence. If someone said no, he simply moved on to the next door. But one conversation would eventually change his life forever. His employer, William Painter, was already known as an inventor. Painter had created the disposable bottle cap, a simple product that businesses needed to replace every time they opened a bottle. Unlike products that customers purchased only once, bottle caps created continuous demand. The more people used them, the more manufacturers needed to buy replacements. One day, Painter shared a piece of advice that stayed with Gillette for the rest of his life. He told him to invent something that people would throw away after using it. If customers had to come back again and again, the business would never run out of buyers. At first, the advice sounded simple, but Gillette couldn't stop thinking about it. He began looking differently at ordinary objects. Pens were refillable. Kitchen knives lasted for years. Scissors could be sharpened indefinitely. Most everyday products were designed to last as long as possible. Where could he find something that people would willingly replace over and over again? For months, no answer came. Then, one ordinary morning while preparing to shave, he picked up a straight razor. Like millions of men at the time, he faced the same frustrating routine. The blade had become dull. Before shaving again, it needed sharpening. Sharpening required special leather strops, careful technique, and patience. If done incorrectly, the razor became even less effective. If ignored, shaving became uncomfortable and sometimes dangerous. Gillette stopped for a moment. He looked at the razor in his hand and remembered Painter's advice. What if only the blade needed replacing? Not the handle, not the entire razor, just a thin piece of steel that actually lost its edge. The idea seemed incredibly obvious, yet no one had successfully turned it into reality. There was one enormous problem. The steel used in traditional razors was thick because it needed to withstand repeated sharpening. A disposable blade would need to be extremely thin, incredibly sharp, inexpensive to manufacture, and strong enough not to break during use. At the time, many engineers believed that producing such a blade on a large scale was practically impossible. Friends questioned the idea. Manufacturers dismissed it. Metal experts explained why it couldn't be done. Some even laughed. But Gillette wasn't discouraged. In fact, every objection made him even more convinced that he was pursuing something truly different. He began sketching ideas, reading technical books, talking to engineers, searching for anyone who believed the impossible might actually be possible. Years passed. Progress was painfully slow. Gillette had the vision, but he lacked the engineering knowledge necessary to manufacture the blade he imagined. Many inventors would have abandoned the project. Instead, he kept searching for someone who could solve the technical challenge. Eventually, that search led him to a brilliant engineer named William Emery Nickerson. Unlike many experts before him, Nickerson didn't immediately reject the concept. He believed the engineering problems were difficult, but not impossible. For the first time, Gillette had found someone who believed the dream could actually become a real product. That partnership would soon change not only their lives, but the future of an entire industry. Turning an idea into a real product proved far more difficult than King Camp Gillette had imagined. Although William Nickerson believed the concept was possible, believing in an invention and actually manufacturing it were two completely different challenges. The disposable blade required a level of precision that simply didn't exist in mass production at the time. It had to be incredibly thin. It had to hold a sharp edge. It had to be strong enough not to bend during shaving. And perhaps most importantly, it had to be inexpensive enough that people would throw it away without hesitation. For years, Gillette and Nickerson experimented with different materials, manufacturing methods, and heat treatments. Prototype after prototype failed. Some blades broke, others couldn't hold an edge. Many were simply too expensive to produce. The engineering problems seemed endless. Meanwhile, Gillette's financial situation became increasingly difficult. Research required money, equipment required money, hiring skilled workers required money. But investors weren't interested. Most believed the idea had little commercial value. Why would anyone throw away a perfectly good razor blade? People had been sharpening the same blades for generations. Changing that habit seemed almost impossible. Gillette spent years trying to convince investors that the future wasn't in selling permanent razors. It was in selling replacement blades. Few people understood what he meant. To them, replacing a blade after only a few uses sounded wasteful. To Gillette, It represented an entirely new business model. Finally, after years of development, the company was officially founded in 1901. It became known as the American Safety Razor Company before later adopting the name that would become famous around the world, Gillette. Even after forming the company, however, success didn't arrive overnight. Production remained slow, manufacturing costs remained high, and the engineering challenges continued. It wasn't until 1903 that Gillette finally sold its first safety razors and disposable blades. The results were far from impressive. Only 51 razors were sold, along with just 168 blades. For most entrepreneurs, numbers like these would have been deeply discouraging. Years of work, years of investment, and only a handful of customers. Many companies would have shut down right there. But Gillette looked beyond those first sales. He wasn't measuring the success of the razor. He was measuring the beginning of a system. Every razor sold created the possibility of selling blades again and again and again. The customer wasn't making a one-time purchase. The customer was entering a long-term relationship with the company. That small difference changed everything. Then something remarkable happened. As more men tried the new safety razor, they realized shaving had become faster, safer, and far more convenient. There was no need to master the dangerous technique of using a straight razor. No need to spend time sharpening blades. When the blade became dull, they simply replaced it. For the first time, shaving became accessible to almost anyone. Word began spreading. Sales slowly increased. Not explosively, not overnight, but steadily. Every satisfied customer introduced the product to someone else. Barbers recommended it. Retailers reordered it. Consumers came back, not for another razor but for more blades. Without realizing it, Gillette had started building something far bigger than a shaving company. He had created a business that could continue generating revenue long after the first sale. And that simple idea would soon become one of the most influential business models in modern history. By the beginning of the 20th century, sales were finally starting to move in the right direction. Not because Gillette had become the cheapest option, and not because the company had suddenly started spending enormous amounts on advertising. Customers were returning for one simple reason. The product solved a real problem. It saved time, it made shaving safer, and replacing a thin blade was much easier than sharpening a heavy straight razor over and over again. As more people adopted the safety razor, King Camp Gillette realized something extraordinary. The razor itself wasn't the real business. The blades were. Most manufacturers of the time focused on maximizing profits from the initial sale. Gillette took a completely different approach. He intentionally kept the price of the razor as low as possible, sometimes earning very little from the handle itself, because he understood that every new customer would continue buying replacement blades for years. That single decision completely transformed the economics of the business. Instead of relying on one transaction, Gillette created recurring revenue long before the term even existed. Every customer represented years of future sales. The more razors the company placed into people's hands, the larger the future demand for blades became. Today, this strategy is known around the world as the razor and blades business model. Ironically, it received that name because of Gillette itself. More than a century later, companies in completely different industries still follow the same principle. Printer manufacturers often sell printers at low prices while earning profits from ink cartridges. Coffee machine companies make money from coffee pods. Video game console makers frequently earn more from games and subscriptions than from the consoles themselves. Even many software companies use similar recurring models through monthly subscriptions. Gillette wasn't simply selling razors, he was quietly teaching the business world a completely new way to think about customer value. As demand increased, the company invested heavily in improving manufacturing. William Nickerson continued refining production techniques, making blades sharper, stronger, and more consistent. Factories became more efficient. Production costs gradually decreased, quality improved. This allowed Gillette to reach even more customers without sacrificing the reliability that had made the product successful. Then history unexpectedly gave the company an enormous opportunity. In 1917, when the United States entered the First World War, millions of young American soldiers needed to shave regularly. Gas masks required clean-shaven faces to create proper seals. Military discipline also demanded a consistent appearance. The US government placed massive orders for Gillette safety razors and disposable blades. Hundreds of thousands of shaving kits were supplied to American troops. For many soldiers, this became their first experience using a Gillette razor. When the war ended and they returned home, they continued purchasing replacement blades for civilian life. What began as a military contract became one of the most powerful customer acquisition opportunities in the company's history. Almost overnight, Gillette gained an enormous base of loyal users. The company couldn't have planned for such an event, but it was fully prepared to take advantage of it because its manufacturing system was already capable of producing blades on a massive scale. The combination of recurring revenue, growing production capacity, and millions of new customers pushed Gillette into an entirely different category. It was no longer just an innovative startup. It was becoming one of America's fastest growing consumer brands. The years following the First World War marked the beginning of an entirely new chapter for Gillette. The company was no longer introducing customers to an unfamiliar invention. Millions of men had already experienced the convenience of the safety razor, and many had incorporated it into their daily routines. For the first time, Gillette wasn't trying to convince people that disposable blades made sense. The market already believed it. Now the challenge was different. The company had to stay ahead of competitors that were eager to copy its success. As Gillette's growth accelerated, rival manufacturers began introducing products that looked remarkably similar. Some tried to imitate the company's razor design. Others attempted to produce cheaper replacement blades. Competition, once almost non-existent, became increasingly intense. Fortunately for Gillette, years of research had resulted in a strong portfolio of patents. Those patents gave the company an important advantage during its early expansion. Competitors couldn't simply duplicate every aspect of the product without facing legal consequences. This protection bought Gillette valuable time to strengthen its position before the market became crowded. But King Cam Gillette understood that patents alone wouldn't guarantee long-term success. Eventually, patents expire. When that happens, customers stay loyal only if they trust the brand itself. For that reason, the company invested not only in engineering but also in reputation. Packaging became more recognizable. Advertising became more sophisticated. The Gillette name gradually evolved from a product into a symbol of quality. Consumers weren't simply asking for a safety razor anymore. Many walked into stores asking specifically for a Gillette. That kind of brand recognition became one of the company's greatest assets. As the business continued expanding, Gillette also embraced technological improvements. Its engineers constantly searched for ways to make blades thinner, sharper, and more durable. Manufacturing equipment became increasingly precise. Production volumes increased dramatically. What had once been a complicated engineering challenge slowly transformed into one of the world's most efficient manufacturing operations. The company's international ambitions also became more evident. Factories and distribution networks expanded beyond the United States. Gillette entered Europe, Latin America, and other international markets, adapting its operations while maintaining the same promise that had defined the company from the beginning: reliable quality. Regardless of where a customer purchased a Gillette blade, the expectation remained the same: a close, safe, and consistent shave. That consistency strengthened consumer confidence around the world. Meanwhile, something else was quietly happening inside the company. Gillette was no longer selling only blades, it was building customer habits. Every morning, millions of people repeated the same routine: Pick up the razor, replace the blade when necessary, continue using the same trusted brand. Those daily habits created extraordinary customer loyalty. Unlike products purchased only once every few years, razor blades required regular replacement. Each satisfied customer represented hundreds, sometimes thousands, of future purchases over a lifetime. Very few businesses enjoyed that level of recurring demand. By the middle of the 20th century, Gillette had become far more than a successful manufacturing company. It had become one of the strongest consumer brands in the world. Its business model was being studied, its marketing strategies were being copied, and its influence extended far beyond the shaving industry. The company had proven that a single innovation, when supported by disciplined execution and long-term thinking, could reshape an entire global market. By the second half of the 20th century, Gillette had already accomplished what most companies could only dream of. It had become the dominant name in shaving. For millions of consumers around the world, buying a razor no longer involved comparing dozens of brands. They simply bought Gillette. That level of recognition wasn't built overnight. It was the result of decades spent improving products, protecting quality, and understanding customer behavior better than almost anyone else in the industry. But success created a new challenge. How do you continue growing when you've already become the market leader? Many companies reach that position only to become comfortable. Innovation slows. Competitors catch up. Customers begin looking elsewhere. Gillette refused to let that happen. Instead of protecting old products, the company kept reinventing them. Throughout the decades, new generations of razors continued reaching the market. Twin blades, pivoting heads, lubricating strips, spring-mounted cartridges. Each innovation promised a smoother, safer, or more comfortable shave. Some critics argued that adding more blades was simply a marketing strategy. Others questioned whether customers truly needed every new improvement. But from a business perspective, the strategy achieved something extremely important. It gave existing customers a reason to upgrade. Rather than waiting for competitors to introduce something new, Gillette constantly introduced the next generation itself. This approach helped the company stay ahead for decades. Advertising also became one of Gillette's greatest competitive weapons. Instead of focusing only on the product, its campaigns sold confidence, precision, performance, success. The brand associated itself with elite athletes, world-class competitions, and professional sports. By sponsoring major international events and partnering with some of the biggest names in sports, Gillette strengthened its image as the premium choice. The razor was no longer just a grooming tool. It became part of a lifestyle. As the company expanded its portfolio, it also entered new categories, introducing products like shaving gels, foams, aftershaves, and personal care items. This allowed Gillette to increase the value of every customer relationship without abandoning its core identity. Then, in 2005, another historic milestone changed the company's future once again. Procter & Gamble announced the acquisition of Gillette in a deal worth approximately $57 billion. At the time, it was one of the largest corporate acquisitions in history. The transaction combined two global consumer giants under the same organization. For Gillette, it meant access to even greater distribution, research capabilities, and international reach. For Procter & Gamble, it meant acquiring one of the strongest brands ever created. More than a century after King Cam Gillette first imagined a disposable blade, his invention had become one of the most valuable consumer businesses in the world. Yet perhaps the company's greatest achievement wasn't the acquisition itself. It was the business philosophy behind everything. Solve a real problem, build trust, create repeat customers, keep improving. Those principles remained remarkably consistent, even as the company evolved through different generations, technologies, and markets. But history would eventually prove that even the strongest brands in the world aren't immune to difficult decisions. After spending more than 100 years carefully building customer trust, Gillette would face one of the biggest public controversies in its history, and it would remind the entire business world that building a brand can take decades. but protecting it requires wisdom every single day. Today, more than a century after King Camp Gillette first imagined a disposable razor blade, his invention continues reaching millions of people every single day. What started as a simple solution to an everyday inconvenience became one of the most influential business ideas in modern history. The company transformed an ordinary daily routine into a global industry. It changed the way people shaved. It influenced manufacturing. It inspired marketing strategies. And perhaps most importantly, it introduced a business model that countless companies still follow today. Very few entrepreneurs leave behind a legacy that extends far beyond the products they created. King Camp Gillette was one of them. His greatest contribution wasn't simply inventing a better razor, it was changing the economics of an entire industry. By understanding that long-term customer relationships could be more valuable than one-time sales, he created a system capable of generating consistent revenue for generations. More than 100 years later, businesses around the world continue applying the same principle in completely different industries. That alone says everything about the power of his original idea. But every great company eventually faces moments that test everything it has spent decades building. For Gillette, one of those moments arrived in 2019. The company released an advertising campaign titled "The Best Men Can Be." Inspired by the growing public discussions surrounding masculinity and social responsibility, the campaign encouraged men to challenge bullying, harassment, and harmful behavior. Some viewers praised the message. Others believed the advertisement unfairly criticized Gillette's own customers. Almost immediately, the campaign sparked intense debate across television, newspapers, and social media. Supporters applauded the company's willingness to address important cultural issues. Critics called for boycotts. Videos discussing the campaign accumulated millions of views. News outlets around the world covered the controversy. Whether people agreed with the campaign or not, one fact became impossible to ignore. The conversation had shifted away from razors. It had become a debate about the brand itself. Around the same period, Procter & Gamble announced that it was recording an approximately $8 billion non-cash impairment related to the Gillette business. The company explained that changing market conditions, increased competition, currency movements, and evolving consumer preferences had affected the long-term valuation of the brand. Many headlines quickly connected the financial write-down directly to the controversial campaign. In reality, business analysts pointed out that the situation was far more complex. The impairment reflected multiple long-term factors rather than a single advertisement. Still, the episode became an important reminder for companies everywhere. Building a strong brand may take decades, but every public decision carries consequences, sometimes positive, sometimes negative, and sometimes impossible to measure immediately. Before we finish, here are the 3 biggest lessons entrepreneurs can learn from the story of Gillette. The first lesson is to solve a real problem. Gillette didn't invent shaving. He simply made it dramatically easier. Businesses that remove friction from people's lives often create the greatest value. The second lesson is to think beyond the first sale. King Camp Gillette understood that building long-term customer relationships could be far more profitable than maximizing short-term revenue. That mindset continues influencing businesses around the world today. And the third lesson is that building a brand requires consistency, but protecting that brand requires wisdom. Every decision, every product, and every public message contributes to the reputation customers build in their minds over time. A strong brand is one of the most valuable assets a company can own, but it should never be taken for granted. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more business documentaries every week. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.